A whisper was all it took to shatter her world. In the glittering heart of 1888, London Lady Alara Vance had everything a loving heart, an impeccable reputation, and the affection of the handsome Lord Julian Ashworth, her fiancé. She believed their love was a fortress, unbreachable and true, but fortresses can fall. In one evening of devastating public betrayal, Julian cast her aside for a wealthier heiress, leaving Alara a pariah, the subject of cruel gossip. Broken and alone in a crowded ballroom, she was a ship sinking in a merciless sea, until a hand reached out from the most unexpected of quarters. The London season of 1888 was a symphony of silk champagne and carefully orchestrated ambition. For Lady Alara Vance, it was supposed to be the crescendo of her life's composition. At 20, she possessed a quiet beauty that was often overlooked in favor of more dazzling debutantes. But her grace and intelligence had captured the one man she believed mattered, Lord Julian Ashworth. Their engagement was the talk of Mayfair. Julian was the heir to a respectable barony, devastatingly handsome, with a poet's smile and a politician's charm. He and Alara had seemed a perfect match. Her father, the Earl of Pemberton, had a distinguished lineage, but a dwindling fortune, while Julian's family had wealth, but craved the social legitimacy the Vance name could provide. It was a match of sense, but for Alara, it was a match of the heart. She loved him with the fierce, pure devotion of a young woman who had never known deceit. She loved the way his eyes, the color of warm honey, would find hers across a crowded room. She loved the books of poetry he gifted her with, passages about eternal love, underlined in his elegant script. They were to be married in the autumn at the family's country estate, a future she had painted in her mind with the most vibrant of colors. Tonight was the annual St. James's Masquerade Ball, held in the palatial residence of the Marquess of Winchester. It was the pinnacle of the season, a night of intrigue and anonymity behind feathered masks and velvet dominoes. Alara felt a thrill of excitement as she descended the grand staircase, her hand resting on Julian's arm. She wore a gown of celestial blue silk that shimmered under the gaslight chandeliers, her mask, a delicate creation of silver filigree and sapphire chips. "You are an absolute vision, my love," Julian murmured, his voice a low caress against her ear. He squeezed her hand, but his gaze was already sweeping the room, cataloguing the influential guests with a practiced eye. "The Duke of Blackwood is here, a rare appearance. They say he never attends such frivolous events." Alara followed his gaze to a figure standing near the French doors leading to the terrace. Even from a distance, the man was formidable. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, was a legend wrapped in shadows. Immensely wealthy and powerful, he was a man of industry and politics, not ballrooms. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair unadorned, his black formal wear a stark contrast to the colourful frippery around him. He wore no mask, a clear statement that he had no need for concealment. His face was all harsh angles and brooding intensity, his expression unreadable. "He looks rather stern," Alara commented softly. "He is power personified," Julian corrected, a note of reverence in his tone. "One word from him could make or break a man's career. The Croft family has been trying to curry his favour for months." He mentioned the name, and as if on cue, Lady Isabel Croft materialized at their side. Isabel was everything. Alara was not, bold, brash, and glittering with the kind of confidence that only came from immense, unshakable wealth. Her gown was a daring crimson, and her diamond necklace was so ostentatious it seemed to pull the light from the room towards it. "Julian, darling," Isabel purred completely, ignoring Alara. She tapped his arm with her fan. My father wishes to have a word with you." Something about those railroad investments. Julian's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before becoming impossibly charming again. "Of course, Lady Isabel. Elara, would you excuse me for a moment, my dear?" He didn't wait for an answer, allowing Isabel to lead him away towards a cluster of powerful-looking older men. Elara watched them go, a familiar tiny splinter of unease lodging itself in her heart. For weeks, Julian had been spending more and more time with the Crofts. He'd called it necessary business, assuring her that securing their investments would guarantee a comfortable future for them. Elara had tried to believe him, pushing aside the whispers she'd heard from her lady's maid about Julian being seen riding in Hyde Park with Isabel or attending the opera in the Croft family's private box. She told herself it was just society gossip, the bitter chatter of jealous rivals. She trusted Julian. She had to. Taking a glass of lemonade from a passing footman, she found a quiet alcove behind a large potted palm. From here she could observe the glittering panorama without feeling quite so alone. She saw Julian deep in conversation with Isabel's father, Sir Reginald Croft, a man whose ruthless business tactics were as famous as his daughter's beauty. Isabel stood beside Julian, her hand resting proprietarily on his sleeve, her laughter loud and triumphant. They looked, Elara thought, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, like a couple. Later, when Julian finally returned to her side, his scent was a cloying mix of his own cologne and Isabel's heavy jasmine perfume. "My apologies, my love," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Sir Reginald can be quite verbose. It seemed you were enjoying Lady Isabel's company as well," Elara said, her voice softer than she intended. Julian waved a dismissive hand. "One must be polite, Elara. You know how these things are. The Crofts are vital to our future." Our future. He'd said the words, but they sounded hollow, like a coin dropped on stone. He led her onto the dance floor for a waltz. For those 3 minutes, as he held her in his arms, spinning her across the polished marble, she almost let her fears dissolve. His hold was firm, his steps perfect. He was her fiancé. This was all in her head. But when the music ended, he bowed stiffly and made another excuse, a word with a minister, a chat with an old acquaintance, and once again he gravitated back towards the orbit of the Crofts. Elara stood alone on the edge of the dance floor, the celestial blue of her dress suddenly feeling cold and heavy. The silver filigree of her mask felt like the bars of a cage. Across the room, she saw the Duke of Blackwood again. He was no longer by the terrace. He was leaning against a marble column, watching the dancers with a detached, almost clinical interest. For a fleeting moment, his grey, piercing eyes met hers. There was no pity in his gaze, no warmth. There was only an unnerving, silent observation. Elara shivered and looked away, feeling as though he had seen straight through her mask and into the heart of her terrified, fracturing hope. The days following the masquerade ball were a study in cold dread. The warmth that had defined her relationship with Julian evaporated, replaced by a polite, distant chill. He was perpetually busy, his excuses becoming flimsier with each passing day. A sudden trip to the country, an urgent meeting in the city, a political dinner he simply couldn't miss. The bouquets of roses he once sent daily ceased to arrive. His loving notes were replaced by curt messages delivered by a footman. Elara's world, once a vibrant tapestry, was fading to grey. The society papers, once her friends, were now instruments of torture. Vicious gossip columns under thinly veiled pseudonyms hinted at a major society engagement on the rocks and a new, more advantageous alliance being formed. They spoke of a certain Lord A. and his newfound appreciation for the dazzling daughter of a railroad magnate. Ilara's mother, the Countess, a woman who valued appearances above all else, dismissed it as baseless chatter. "Jealousy is a terrible thing, my dear," she would say, tapping Ilara's hand with her fan. "Pay it no mind. A wedding date is set. The invitations are being printed." But Ilara knew. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, a cold, heavy stone of truth. The final brutal confirmation came not from Julian, but from the careless cruelty of others. She had been taking tea with her aunt, Lady Beatrice, in a fashionable Bond Street patisserie. The small room was abuzz with the low hum of female chatter. Through the delicate lattice screen separating their table from the next, Ilara heard a familiar, sharp voice. It was Lady Isabel Croft holding court with two of her sycophantic friends. "He is utterly devoted," Isabel was saying, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "He told me himself that his previous arrangement was a boyish infatuation, a matter of familial duty, nothing more. He said he never knew what real passion was until he met me." And the Vance girl, one of her friends, asked, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "What will become of her, Isabel?" laughed a sound like tiny, sharp pieces of glass. "Poor thing. She'll be sent to rusticate in the country, I imagine. It's for the best. She hasn't the constitution for our world. Julian needs a wife who can be a lioness, not a lamb." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. The teacup in her hand trembled, rattling against its saucer. Her aunt shot her a panicked look, but Ilara couldn't move. She was frozen, impaled by Isabel's cruel words. "The official announcement will be in the Times next week," Isabel continued, her voice rising with triumph. "My father has settled a fortune on him. The Ashworth barony will be solvent for 100 years, and I shall have my title. A perfect transaction, don't you think?" Ilara pushed back her chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. She fled the patisserie, ignoring her aunt's frantic calls. The bustling London street was a blur of carriages and faces. She felt as though she were suffocating, the tight laces of her corset constricting her lungs. A transaction. That's all she had been. That's all her love had meant. That evening she demanded to see Julian. He could not refuse a direct summons to her family's home, not without causing a full-blown scandal, before he was ready. He arrived in the drawing room of Vance House, looking like a man facing a firing squad. All the easy charm had been stripped away, leaving behind a pale, nervous young man who couldn't quite meet her eyes. Ilara stood before the cold fireplace, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She had shed her tears of shock and grief in the privacy of her room. Now all that remained was a chilling, brittle calm. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. Julian shifted his weight. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Ilara, you must understand. These things are complicated. It is a simple question, Julian. Is your engagement to me over so that you may marry Lady Isabel Croft?" He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not love or remorse, but a desperate, pathetic plea for understanding. "Her father made me an offer I couldn't refuse. My family's estates are on the brink of ruin. This is not about my feelings for you. It's a matter of survival, of duty to my name." "Your duty?" She repeated the words, tasting like ash. "And what of your duty to me? The vows you made, the promises you wrote in every letter, in every book of poetry you marked for me, were they all just part of the transaction?" He flinched at her use of the word. "You are making this unnecessarily difficult." "I am making this difficult." Her voice rose, the brittle calm finally cracking. "You have spent months courting another woman behind my back. You have allowed my name to be dragged through the mud of every gossip column in London. You have broken my heart and humiliated my family, and you stand there and tell me that I am making this difficult. It was never my intention to hurt you," he said, his voice weak. "Your intentions are meaningless, Julian," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Only your actions matter." She slowly, deliberately pulled the sapphire and diamond engagement ring from her finger. The ring he had claimed was a family heirloom, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. She held it out to him on the palm of her hand. "I believe this now belongs to a lioness. The lamb has no more use for it." He had the decency to flush with shame. He wouldn't take the ring, couldn't bring himself to perform the final act of severance. "Leave it on the table," he muttered, turning to go. "I will send for my things tomorrow." He walked out of the room without a backward glance. Elara watched him, go her back ramrod straight. Only when she heard the front door close with a heavy final thud did she allow herself to collapse. She sank onto the sofa, the ring falling from her numb fingers and skittering across the polished floor. The sound echoed in the cavernous silence of the room, the sound of her entire world shattering into a million irreparable pieces. In high society, a broken engagement was like a drop of blood in shark-infested waters. The feeding frenzy was immediate and merciless. Elara Vance, once the respectable, envied fiancé of a lord, was now a subject of pity and scorn. She was the jilted girl, the failed debutante, the lamb who had been led to slaughter. Her mother took to her bed with a case of nerves, leaving Elara to face the fallout alone. Her father, a man more comfortable with ledgers than emotions, retreated into his study, his silence a crushing weight of disappointment. Elara was effectively a prisoner in her own home, but she knew she could not hide forever. To do so would be to admit defeat, to validate every cruel whisper. Her chance to face the world, or her public execution as she thought of it, came with the Duchess of Devonshire's annual charity ball, an event no one of any standing could afford to miss. Against her father's wishes and her mother's hysterical pleas, Elara decided to go. She would not be seen as a wilting flower crushed by scandal. She would hold her head high, even if it felt like walking into an arena filled with lions. She chose her gown with the care of a general selecting his armor. It was a simple, elegant dress of ivory satin. No frills, no garish jewels. Her only adornment was a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. She was not there to compete with Isabel's fire. She was there to project an image of serene, untouchable dignity. The moment her name was announced at the entrance to the Devonshire ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. It was a physical thing, a sudden drop in pressure that made her ears ring. Then the whispers began, a low, sibilant hiss that followed her as she moved into the room. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. She kept her chin up, her gaze fixed on a point far in the distance, and walked towards the center of the room as if she were completely deaf to the murmurs. So brave of her to show her face, or so foolish. She looks terribly pale. Did you see Isabel's ring, a diamond the size of a robin's egg? Julian certainly traded up. The words were like tiny poisoned darts. She found a spot near a large floral arrangement and stood there, a solitary island in a sea of swirling silks and judging eyes. And then she saw them. Julian and Isabel were making their grand entrance. They were the couple of the hour, the victors of the social battlefield. Isabel was radiant in a gown of emerald green, the infamous diamond flashing on her finger like a malevolent star. Julian, ever the charming prince, was smiling and laughing his arm possessively around Isabel's waist. He looked happy, carefree, and utterly untroubled. As they moved through the room, accepting congratulations, their path inevitably led them towards Elara. It was a calculated move on Isabel's part, a desire to twist the knife to display her triumph before the woman she had vanquished. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. Flee, every instinct screamed. Run from this room and never look back. But she held her ground. She would not give them the satisfaction. They stopped a few feet from her. Julian's smile faltered when he saw her. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Isabel, however, looked ecstatic. Lady Ilara Isabel said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What a surprise to see you out and about. We had all assumed you'd be resting." The implication was clear, resting from a broken heart, a shattered mind. Ilara met her gaze, her own expression, a mask of cool civility. "Lady Isabel, Lord Ashworth, congratulations on your recent announcement." "Thank you," Isabel purred. "One simply cannot stand in the way of true love, can one?" She held up her hand, angling the diamond so it caught the light. "Isn't it magnificent? Julian is so terribly generous." Julian said nothing. He just stood there, a handsome, silent effigy of his own cowardice. Ilara felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She gave them a small, tight smile. "I wish you all the happiness you deserve." She said her words perfectly polite, but laced with an icy subtext that only she and Julian could understand. It was in that moment, at her absolute lowest point, with the wolves of society circling and her betrayer flaunting his victory, that the crowd parted. A presence, not just a person, moved through the throng. The whispers changed their tune, shifting from her humiliation to awe and surprise. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, was walking directly towards them. He moved with an unhurried, commanding grace that made everyone else in the room seem trivial. He stopped beside Ilara, his towering height and imposing presence creating an invisible shield around her. The air crackled with tension. He completely ignored Julian and Isabel. His piercing grey eyes, which she remembered from the masquerade ball, were fixed solely on her. They were not pitying. They were assessing. "Lady Ilara," he said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that cut through the surrounding chatter with ease. "I was hoping I might find you here." Ilara stared at him, utterly bewildered. She had never spoken to the man in her life. Your Grace was all she could manage. He offered her his arm. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. "I find the atmosphere in this room to be rather suffocating," the Duke said, his gaze flicking for a single dismissive second over Isabel and Julian. "Would you do me the honor of taking a turn on the terrace?" It was not a request. It was a command, wrapped in the guise of courtesy. It was a lifeline. Without a second thought, Ilara placed her trembling hand on his arm. The fabric of his coat was fine wool, and beneath it his arm was like granite. As he led her away, she risked a glance back. Isabel's face was a mask of thunderous disbelief, her triumph curdled into fury. Julian just looked stunned, his mouth slightly agape. The Duke of Blackwood had just publicly snubbed the most celebrated couple of the season to rescue the most pitied woman, and in doing so, he had just thrown a match into the gasoline of London society. The cool night air of the terrace was a welcome shock to Ilara's senses. The suffocating heat and perfume of the ballroom receded, replaced by the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth from the gardens below. The murmur of the party was a distant hum, a world away from the silent, charged atmosphere that now surrounded her and the Duke. She withdrew her hand from his arm, suddenly conscious of the impropriety and sheer strangeness of the situation. She turned to face him, the moonlight catching the sharp planes of his face, making him seem more like a carved statue than a man. "Your Grace," she began, her voice still shaky. I must thank you. That was very kind." Kindness had little to do with it. Lady Alara, the Duke said, his voice as cool and crisp as the night air. He leaned against the stone balustrade, his gaze fixed not on her, but on the distant lights of the city. I have an aversion to public floggings, especially when the accused has committed no crime. His directness was startling. He wasn't offering platitudes or empty reassurances. He was stating a fact, as if observing a poorly executed business transaction. Nevertheless, you saved me from a deeply unpleasant situation, she insisted quietly. I am in your debt. A debt I intend to collect, he said, finally turning his full attention to her. His grey eyes were intense, searching, and made her feel entirely transparent. I did not bring you out here for a pleasant chat about the weather, my lady. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. What could this powerful, enigmatic man possibly want from her? Then why, your grace? He was silent for a long moment, studying her face with an unnerving scrutiny. I have been observing you, Lady Alara. Not just tonight, but for some time. You possess a quality that is exceedingly rare in this city fortitude. You walked into that ballroom tonight knowing you would be eviscerated, yet you did it anyway. You faced your tormentors without flinching. You have a spine of steel beneath that silk gown. Alara was speechless. No one had ever described her in such a way. She had always been the quiet one, the gentle one, the lamb. I have a proposal for you, he continued, his tone becoming all business. It is unconventional, and it will require you to be as strong as I believe you are. Her mind raced. Was he offering her patronage? A way out of London? A proposal? I am a man who values efficiency and dislikes complication, he stated. The annual parade of simpering debutantes pushed on me by their ambitious mothers is a complication I can no longer tolerate. I require a duchess, someone of good breeding, intelligence, and impeccable character. Someone who understands duty and can manage a household with grace. You, Lady Alara, fit those requirements perfectly. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She must have misheard him. The shock of the evening must be making her delirious. Your Grace, I don't understand what you're saying. I am saying, he articulated, with deliberate slowness, as if speaking to a child, that I am asking you to be my wife. The world tilted on its axis. Of all the things she had expected, this was beyond the realm of imagination. The Duke of Blackwood, the most powerful, most sought after, and most unattainable man in England, was proposing marriage. To her, the jilted, disgraced Alara Vance. Marry you, she whispered the words, feeling alien on her tongue. But why we do not know each other? There is no affection between us. Affection is a fickle and unreliable foundation for an institution as important as marriage, he countered smoothly. What I am offering is not a whirlwind romance, Lady Alara. I am offering a partnership, a contract. I will give you my name, my protection, and my fortune. You will be the Duchess of Blackwood. No one will ever dare to whisper behind your back again. Your family's name will be restored, their financial worries erased. You will have a position of immense power and respect. In return, you will be my Duchess, perform the duties that title entails, and provide me with an heir. Your life within our homes will be your own. I will not be a demanding husband in the conventional sense. It was the coldest, most calculated proposal ever uttered. A business merger. He was offering to buy her, to save her from her social ruin in exchange for her name and her womb. A part of her was horrified, insulted. But another more pragmatic part, a part she didn't even know she possessed, was listening intently. He was offering her not just survival, but victory. To marry the Duke of Blackwood would be the ultimate revenge on Julian and Isabel. It would silence the gossip forever. It would elevate her to a sphere so far above them, they would become insignificant specks. She would not be the pitied lamb. She would be the untouchable lioness. "You would marry me?" she asked again, needing to hear it once more to believe it. A woman whose engagement was just so publicly and humiliatingly broken, Lord Ashworth's staggering lack of judgment, is his problem, not yours, the Duke said, with a dismissive shrug. In fact, it presents an opportunity. Your current vulnerability makes this proposal mutually beneficial. You need a rescue. I need a wife. The timing is perfect. She looked back through the glass doors at the ballroom. She could see Isabel holding court, Julian smiling by her side. She saw the faces of the women who had whispered about her, the men who had looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Then she looked back at the Duke. He was offering her a gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage at the very top of the world. And from that height she could finally learn to fly. A spark of defiance, something she thought had been extinguished forever, ignited within her. And if I accept a flicker of something surprise respect passed through his eyes, then we will return to that ballroom, and I will make our engagement public. Tonight. He was not a man who wasted time. This was a strategic move, a power play, and he intended to execute it with ruthless efficiency. Ilara took a deep breath, the jasmine-scented air filling her lungs. She was standing on the edge of a cliff. She could retreat into the shadows and live out her life as a spinster, an object of eternal pity, or she could leap. She met the Duke's intense grey gaze, and for the first time that night, she did not feel like a victim. She felt like a player in a game she was finally beginning to understand. "Very well, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I accept your proposal." The Duke of Blackwood Alastair, as he now insisted she call him in private, wasted no time. True to his word, he led her back into the ballroom. The moment they stepped through the French doors, a fresh wave of whispers erupted, more frantic this time. He did not lead her to a quiet corner. He walked her directly into the centre of the room, to the small raised dais where the Duchess of Devonshire was holding court. He bowed to the Duchess, a gesture of perfect formal respect. "Your Grace," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the suddenly silent room. "May I be the first to offer you my congratulations. Your ball will be remembered as the night I became engaged to the future Duchess of Blackwood." He turned and smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curving of his lips that did not reach his eyes at Ilara. "Lady Ilara Vance has done me the great honour of accepting my hand in marriage." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, ringing void where 1,000 gasps were held in check. Jaws, both literal and metaphorical, dropped. Isabel Croft's face, which Ilara could see over the Duke's shoulder, was a picture of apoplectic shock, her emerald green dress suddenly making her look bilious. Julian looked as if he had been physically struck. Then the dam broke. The room exploded into a cacophony of exclamations, congratulations, and feverish speculation. The Duke had not just thrown a match into the gasoline. He had detonated a bomb in the heart of London society. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal blur for Ilara. She was swarmed by people who an hour ago had been pitying her. Their congratulations were fawning, their smiles rapacious. They were not congratulating her. They were worshipping at the altar of the Duke's power. Through it all, Alastair stood by her side, a formidable, unmovable rock. He handled the crowds with practiced ease, his comments, brief his demeanour, polite, but utterly impenetrable. The next morning, the official announcement ran on the front page of the Times. By noon, Vance's house was inundated with floral arrangements, so vast they had to be placed in the hallways. Her mother, miraculously recovered from her nerves, was ecstatic, preening over the social coup of the century. Her father emerged from his study, looking at Elara with a newfound respect that pained her more than his previous disappointment. They didn't see the cold, hard bargain that had been struck on a moonlit terrace. They only saw the title, the fortune, the victory. 2 days later, Elara was summoned to Blackwood House, the Duke's imposing London residence on Belgrave Square. It was less a home and more a fortress of grey stone and dark marble, a physical manifestation of the man himself. She was shown not to a drawing room, but to his library. It was a vast 2-story chamber, lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. A fire crackled in a cavernous hearth, and the air smelled of old paper lemon polish and power. Alistair was standing by the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. He was dressed not in formal wear, but in a simple white shirt and dark trousers. Yet he seemed even more intimidating without the armor of society dress. "Lady Elara," he said, turning to face her. "Please sit." He gestured to a large leather armchair opposite a massive mahogany desk. Piles of documents and ledgers were stacked neatly on its surface. He did not sit beside her, but took the seat behind the desk, immediately establishing a dynamic of business, not intimacy. "I trust the past 2 days haven't been too overwhelming," he said. It wasn't a question born of concern, but a statement of fact. "It has been an education," Elara replied, her voice steady. She would not be intimidated in this house that was to become her own. "Good," he said with a nod. "Then you understand the power of the position you are about to assume, which brings us to the more practical matters." He slid a sheaf of papers across the polished surface of the desk. "This is a prenuptial settlement drawn up by my solicitors. It is quite generous. It ensures your financial independence for the rest of your life, regardless of the outcome of our union. It also makes significant provisions for your family, settling all of your father's outstanding debts and establishing a trust for their future." Elara looked at the document. It was a testament to his efficiency. He had already investigated her family's finances down to the last shilling. He was buying her and her entire family lock, stock, and barrel. "My solicitors will need to review this," she said, her voice cool, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Of course, I would expect nothing less." He then pushed a second, thinner document towards her. "This is more personal. It outlines my expectations for the Duchess of Blackwood." She picked it up. It was not in legalese, but written in his own bold, decisive hand. It read like a list of duties for a high-level employee. "The Duchess will oversee the management of all domestic staff at Blackwood Manor, Blackwood House, and our Scottish estate. The Duchess will be responsible for hosting a prescribed number of social and political events per season, the guest lists for which we will compile together. The Duchess will engage in appropriate charitable works to be chosen by her that reflect well upon the family name. The Duchess will provide one male heir to secure the continuation of the dukedom. Upon the birth of a healthy heir, the more intimate aspects of our marital duties will be concluded, unless mutually agreed upon otherwise. The Duke and Duchess will maintain separate bedchambers and afford one another complete privacy in their personal lives, so long as no action is taken that would bring scandal upon the name of Beaumont." Elara read the list twice. It was shockingly blunt, brutally honest, and in a strange way liberating. He was not promising love or passion. He was offering freedom within a structured partnership. The clause about the heir was cold and clinical, but it also promised an end to an obligation she dreaded. "You are very thorough, Your Grace," she said, setting the paper down. "I believe clarity prevents future misunderstandings," he replied. "I am not a cruel man, Lady Alara, but I am not a romantic one either. I will treat you with the utmost respect. I will be your staunchest defender and ally. I will never raise my voice or my hand to you. In public, we will present a unified, impenetrable front. In private, we will lead our own lives. Do you find these terms acceptable?" She looked at him, the powerful, enigmatic man who was offering her a crown in exchange for her freedom. But hadn't her freedom already been stolen by Julian? Hadn't her heart already been broken? Perhaps this cold, clear contract was safer than the treacherous, shifting sands of love. With Alistair, there were no illusions to be shattered. "The terms are clear," she said, "and I find them acceptable." "Excellent," he said, steepling his fingers. "Then there is one last thing. I wish for the wedding to be in 1 month's time. So soon there is no reason to wait. A swift marriage will cement our position and put an end to any lingering gossip. I have already taken the liberty of securing a special license. We will be married at St. George's, Hanover Square." He stood up, signaling the end of their meeting. "My secretary, Mr. Abernathy, will coordinate with you and your family on the details. I have instructed him that your every wish regarding the ceremony is to be honored. The Duchess of Blackwood must have the wedding of the season." He was handing her a blank check to stage the perfect society wedding, a performance for the world to see. It was another strategic move in his grand game. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Your Grace?" "Alistair." "May I ask you a question?" He inclined his head. "Why me truly? There were dozens of other more suitable women from powerful families who would have gladly accepted this arrangement." He was silent for a moment, his gaze turning back to the window. The other women wanted the Duke of Blackwood. They wanted the title, the power, the fantasy. They would have come with their own ambitions, their own family allegiances, their own emotional demands. They would have been complicated. He looked back at her, his grey eyes unblinking. "You, Lady Alara, you just needed to be saved. It makes you a much more reliable partner. And as I said, you have a spine of steel. I have no interest in a china doll for a duchess." With that, he turned back to the window, and Alara left the library with a contract in her hand and a chilling understanding of the man she was about to marry. He had not chosen her in spite of her broken heart. He had chosen her because of it. The month leading up to the wedding was a whirlwind of fittings, florists, and feverish planning. Alara threw herself into the role Alistair had assigned her, playing the part of the radiant bride-to-be with an actress's skill. She smiled for the society pages, chose menus with the caterers, and approved seating charts that would cause the maximum amount of envy and speculation. She was no longer just Alara Vance. She was a piece on Alistair's chessboard, and she was learning to appreciate the power of her position. Life as the future Duchess was starkly different. Tradesmen bowed to her society, hostesses fawned over her, and even her own parents treated her with a new deferential awe. The whispers that had once followed her were now ones of admiration and envy. Isabel Croft had reportedly flown into a rage and smashed a priceless vase upon hearing of the wedding date, a piece of gossip that brought a grim smile to Alara's face. Alistair was true to his word. He was a constant, supportive presence in public, his hand on the small of her back, his quiet word in her ear. In private, he was distant, absorbed in his work. Their interactions were brief, polite, and focused on the logistics of their impending merger. He would inquire about the wedding plans, approve her choices with a nod, and then retreat back into his world of shipping ledgers, railroad contracts, and political correspondence. Elara found herself living in Blackwood House in the week before the wedding, as was deemed appropriate for final preparations. The house was a silent, well-oiled machine run by a formidable housekeeper, Mrs. Davenport, a woman with a gaze as stern as her master's. Elara knew she was being watched, evaluated. She spent her days exploring the vast, lonely mansion, her footsteps echoing in the long corridors. It was during one of these explorations that she stumbled upon the truth. Alistair had been called away to Manchester on urgent business concerning one of his mills. He was due back the night before the wedding. The house was quieter than usual, and Elara, unable to sleep, found herself wandering towards the one place she felt drawn to the library. A single lamp was burning on Alistair's massive desk. A book had been left open, and a half-empty glass of whiskey sat beside it. It was a rare sign of haste from the meticulously organized Duke. As she moved to close the book, her eyes fell upon a leather-bound folio that was not quite closed. A piece of paper, a surveyor's map, was sticking out. Curiosity, a trait she was quickly discovering in herself, got the better of her. She gently opened the folio. Inside were not personal letters, but detailed business files. The top one was labeled simply Croft Shipping. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She sat down in Alistair's chair and began to read. For over an hour she sifted through correspondence, financial reports, and shipping manifests. A story began to unfold, a story far more complex than a simple society rivalry. Sir Reginald Croft, Isabel's father, was not just a competitor of Alistair's, he was an enemy. Croft was using predatory tactics to try and bankrupt a smaller independent shipping line, the Meridian Atlantic Line. The reports detailed how Croft was undercutting their prices at a loss, bribing port officials to delay their ships, and spreading rumors about their seaworthiness to scare off investors. As she delved deeper, she found another file, this one labeled Beaumont Investments Meridian. Alistair wasn't just a casual observer. He was the primary anonymous investor in the Meridian Atlantic Line. He had poured a fortune into the company not for profit. The reports made it clear it was a high-risk, low-yield venture. But because Meridian was the sole employer for a small coastal town in Cornwall. If Meridian failed, hundreds of families would be destitute. Croft was trying to crush them to absorb their roots and create a monopoly. Alistair was single-handedly keeping them afloat. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when she found a letter from one of Alistair's informants. It was dated the week before the St. James's Masquerade Ball. Your Grace, it read. The deal is all but done. Croft has made a final offer to Lord Ashworth, contingent on his marriage to his daughter. The settlement will give Croft access to Ashworth's political connections in the Admiralty, which he will use to block Meridian's naval contracts. The engagement will be announced within the fortnight. This will be the final nail in Meridian's coffin. Elara dropped the letter, as if it had burned her. It all made sense. The cold, calculated brilliance of it was breathtaking. This was never about saving her. It was about destroying his enemy. Julian's engagement to Isabel wasn't just a social match. It was a business alliance, a crucial final move in Croft's hostile takeover. Alistair needed to break that alliance. By proposing to Elara, he had done more than just humiliate Isabel. He had publicly and spectacularly shattered the foundation of Croft and Julian's deal. He had driven a wedge between them, making Julian look like a faithless opportunist and tying the Croft name to a jilted fiancé, a social stain that would make their new alliance toxic. He hadn't rescued her out of kindness or a sense of justice. He had used her. She was a weapon in his corporate war. A wave of cold fury washed over her, so potent it left her breathless. It was followed by a sharp, unexpected pang of hurt. She had accepted the terms of their loveless bargain, but she had believed in his stated reasons. She had believed he saw a strength in her, that his motives, while unsentimental, were at least honest. This calculated manipulation felt like a deeper betrayal than Julian's shallow cowardice. She sat in the silent library for a long time, the damning papers spread before her. Her first instinct was to confront him, to throw his deceit in his face. But what would that accomplish? He would likely admit it without apology. He was a strategist, and she had been his most successful maneuver. No, a confrontation was what he would expect. What he wouldn't expect was for her to understand the game and make a move of her own. She carefully put every paper back in its place, closing the folio and pushing it to the exact spot she had found it. She turned off the lamp and left the library, her mind whirring. He had told her that the Duchess of Blackwood was expected to engage in charitable works. He had told her they would be allies. He had chosen her because she had a spine of steel. Very well, she thought, a cold resolve settling over her. He was about to find out just how strong it was. She was not just a pawn to be moved around a board. She would become a queen, and she would start by taking a personal interest in a certain small shipping line in Cornwall. Their wedding was the event of the year. St. George's was a forest of white lilies and roses, and the guest list was a roll call of the British aristocracy. Ilara walked down the aisle on her father's arm, a vision in ivory lace and heirloom pearls, her expression serene and composed. She met Alistair at the altar, and as he took her hand, his was cool and steady. They exchanged their vows in clear, firm voices, two monarchs forging an alliance. To the world, they were a picture of power and elegance. The reception at Blackwood House was a masterpiece of social theatre. Ilara, now the Duchess of Blackwood, moved through the crowds with a new innate authority. She greeted ministers' charmed ambassadors and accepted the fawning congratulations of the very people who had scorned her a month prior. She was everything Alistair had wanted in a duchess, graceful, intelligent, and utterly unflappable. She saw Julian and Isabel across the room. They had been forced to attend, as to decline would have been a public admission of defeat. Isabel's smile was brittle, her eyes filled with venom. Julian simply looked lost, a man who had traded a queen for a pawn and was only now realizing his catastrophic miscalculation. Ilara met their gazes with a cool, pleasant nod and turned away, dismissing them from her world. Late that evening, when the last of the guests had finally departed, Ilara and Alistair stood alone in the grand ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of wilted flowers and champagne. "You performed admirably today, Your Grace," Alistair said, his voice holding a note of genuine approval. "You are everything I hoped for." "As did you," Ilara replied, turning to face him. The firelight from the hearth danced in her eyes. "But the performance is over, isn't it, Alistair? Now I believe it's time for us partners to be honest with one another." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Indeed, I know about the Meridian Atlantic line," she said simply. The air between them changed, became charged with a new, dangerous electricity. Alistair's polite mask dropped away, replaced by the sharp, assessing gaze of the ruthless businessman. He did not look surprised, merely expectant. "I see," he said slowly. "You have been in my library." "I have," she confirmed. "I know that our marriage was not a rescue. It was a strategic maneuver in your war with Sir Reginald Croft. You needed to sever Julian's alliance with him, and I was the perfect publicly humiliated weapon to do it." He didn't deny it. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "That is a concise and accurate summary of the situation. You used me," she said, her voice low but steady, devoid of the hysteria he might have expected. You used my pain and my public disgrace as a tool for a corporate takeover. I did, he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. And in doing so, I also gave you a title, a fortune, and a position of unassailable power. I would call the transaction mutually beneficial. Ilara laughed, a soft, humorless sound. A transaction. That seems to be the word that defines my life lately. But you underestimated me, Alistair. You thought you were marrying a grateful, broken-hearted girl who would be content to arrange flowers and host parties. You told me you chose me because I have a spine of steel. I'm afraid you're about to discover it's stronger than you imagined. She walked over to a small writing desk in the corner and picked up a folder she had placed there earlier. She handed it to him. This is a proposal for the establishment of the Duchess's Fund for Coastal Communities. Its first project will be to build new housing and a school for the families of the workers of the Meridian Atlantic Line. I have already drafted the press announcement, which highlights the Duke and Duchess's joint commitment to supporting hard-working British industries against predatory monopolies. It will run in every major newspaper tomorrow morning. Alistair opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. She had mimicked his own thoroughness, including cost analyses, timelines, and a list of influential patrons she had already begun to court. "This is a direct public attack on Croft," he said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. "It is," she agreed. "You fought him in the shadows. I am taking the fight into the light. The public will rally to the side of the poor, hard-working families, sponsored by their new Duchess. Croft will be seen as the villain he is. His reputation will be ruined. His political allies, like the cowardly Lord Ashworth, will abandon him. You fought a war of ledgers. I will fight a war of hearts and minds." She took a step closer to him, her gaze defiant. "I am your wife, and your partner, Alistair. That means I am a part of this war, whether you intended me to be or not. I will not be a passive weapon in your arsenal. I will be your general fighting by your side. These are my terms for the continuation of our contract." He stood there for a long moment, the folder in his hand, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Ilara held her breath, her gamble laid bare. Then slowly, a genuine smile spread across his face. It was the first true smile she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his harsh features, revealing a startling warmth beneath the icy exterior. "I see," he said, his voice a low rumble of amusement, and something else, something that sounded like wonder. "I said I did not want a china doll for a duchess." He looked from the folder back to her, his grey eyes shining with a new light. "It seems I have found myself a queen." He closed the distance between them, taking her hand not in a formal gesture, but with a surprising gentleness. "The Duchess's Fund is an excellent, utterly ruthless idea. I approve." In that moment, standing amidst the fading remnants of their spectacular wedding, Ilara knew their arrangement had fundamentally changed. The cold contract had been set alight, and from its ashes, something new and far more powerful was beginning to rise. It was not the sweet, naive love she had felt for Julian. It was something forged in fire and strategy, built on mutual respect and a shared, indomitable will. Their marriage would not be a story of romance. It would be the story of an empire built by a duke and his unexpected, unbreakable queen. Ilara's journey from a heartbroken victim to a powerful duchess shows us that sometimes the deepest betrayals can lead to our greatest strengths. Her story isn't just about revenge or a fairy tale rescue. It's about discovering the steel within herself when the world tried to break her. It's about finding a true partner, not in a man who promises poetry, but in one who recognizes and respects her power. She traded a fragile romance for an unbreakable alliance, and in doing so, found a love more profound than she could have ever imagined. If you were moved by Alara's journey from pawn to queen, please let us know in the comments below. Who was your favorite character? And what was the most shocking twist for you? Don't forget to like this video. If you enjoyed the story, share it with a friend who loves historical drama, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of betrayal, resilience, and unexpected love.